Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, along with our DJ Tolliver. And Tolliver, I have a question for you. Are you a betting man?
Okay, I can't believe I haven't told you this story. Last year I was on Let's Make a Deal, and I did a duet with Wayne Brady. That's true. And I won $400. So yes, I'm a betting man.
Okay. I haven't been on a game show ever before. I would do the prices right, maybe. I do love a scratcher lottery ticket, although not the crossword ones because they take too long. But I asked that question of you because this hour we're diving into gambling, which is no longer just about casinos, lotteries, and even game shows. Ever since a Supreme Court decision struck down a federal ban back in 2018, nearly 40 states now offer legal sports betting. 44 states have casinos. And now there are these prediction markets, companies like Polymarket and Kalshi, that allow you to bet on who will win a political race or even what action the military might take.
On the online platform Polymarket, a handful of gamblers made hundreds of thousands of dollars betting that the U.S. would strike Iran by Saturday, February 28th.
A more than $400,000 mystery has been uncovered following the capture of former Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Just hours before news actually broke of the military operation, an anonymous user on a prediction market placed a significant bet that Maduro would be out of power by the end of the month.
Things that make you go, Well, those prediction markets are booming and so far not regulated by the states, only by the Federal Commodities Futures Trading Commission. So what does all this gambling mean for society? That is what we want to know from you. Does America have a gambling problem, or is this simply a new and mostly harmless way to make or lose money? Tolliver, how can our listeners reach us?
You can call us at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write to us at listentothemiddle.com or comment on our live stream on YouTube.
And joining us this hour, Axios business reporter Nathan Bomey, who's been covering this issue. Nathan, welcome.
Good to be here.
And also joining us, Charles Fain Lehman, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. Charles, welcome to you as well.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Nathan, let me start with you because this kind of reminds me of a show that we did a while back about marijuana legalization, which first happened in the U.S. in 2 states in 2014. And within a decade, it was legal in about half the states, recreational marijuana use. And there were unintended consequences. There are things like gummies that look like they're marketed to kids. What is the lay of the land right now when it comes to gambling in America?
Well, I think we have experienced sweeping cultural change, and just because of this Supreme Court ruling in 2018 that opened the door for states to legalize sports gambling online. And, this was an activity that in the past was maybe something you could do in Las Vegas,
right.
And, you might do it once a year, maybe once every 5 years or something like that. And, you might even talk to your friends about a joke about it, but now it's becoming something you can do on the toilet. I mean, this is not something that you have to make any effort to do anymore. And I think that is what is the dramatic change. It's the fact that you can just tap, tap, tap on your phone and
right.
You can literally bet your life savings in a drop of a hat. And so I think that's brought all sorts of consequences. And, certainly advocates say that responsible betting is something that we can do. And a lot of people do it. But there are also, consequences that
right.
can be really harmful.
Well, and what are those consequences in your view, Charles?
Yeah, well, and the nice thing about this is there's a growing body of literature, social scientific literature that we can point to, and most of it is fairly informative because gambling was legalized, sports gambling was legalized in different states at different times, and so you can exploit that in what's talked about as difference in difference, or sometimes synthetic control model, which is a fancy way of saying you compare states where it is legal, states where it's not yet legal, before and after legalization.
Right.
And that tells us a bunch of really useful and also quite shocking stuff. It tells you that when you legalize sports gambling, credit card defaults go up, bankruptcies go up, people spend less money on investment accounts because they put more money into gambling. It tells us that reports of child maltreatment go up. There are some indicators that crime go up. So what you see across the board in this research is, and this is I think true of all addictive products, including gambling, is that most people who consume these products will do so quote unquote responsibly, but a meaningful fraction, 5 to 10% of the users will do will consume quote unquote irresponsibly. They will
Right.
do the large majority of the consuming, and those are the people who are going to end up losing the house, who are going to end up getting riled up by gambling and engaging in domestic violence or neglecting their children or engaging in crime. The people who are going to be yelling at players from the sidelines. I think there are a bunch of extremely predictable consequences to all of this stuff that other countries have experienced when they've legalized it. And when you look at the experience of individual states and how it is rolled out there, those states are experiencing exactly what we would expect them to experience. And most of it doesn't look great.
Well, and these are the consequences on the individuals. What about, let me just ask this question. What about the consequences for like sports when there's all this gambling going on, Charles?
I think that's been a major impetus for concern. There have been a series of really very high-profile gambling-associated scandals. You look at the Cleveland Guardians, you look at Portland. There's a huge amount in college sports, and I think it feels like you get a new scandal every day. One argument from advocates is just that it's easy to identify when people are cheating. But I think what you often see in these markets, in these sports books, is they provide in-game prop bets, in-game micro bets that make it very easy to bet on how often somebody is going to strike out, what somebody is going to do at the top of the third inning, and it's obviously very easy to rig the game. And so I think there are when the original law that the Supreme Court struck down in 2018, when it was passed in 1992, it was done with the support of all the sports leagues, because they came out and said, we think that nationwide sports gambling is going to affect the integrity of the game, and we want to ban it preemptively. And there was, they were right. They were right at the time.
Well, and Nathan, when you think about who's gambling more now than before, it seems like young men are the most likely participants. In fact, about half of men aged 18 to 49 have an online betting account, which was a surprise to me.
Wow.
Yeah, there's no doubt that young men are more susceptible to this and engage in it more frequently. Perhaps it's because they're more likely to be sports fans. Perhaps it's because young men tend to have a higher risk profile, and so they just tend to do riskier things. And there certainly are women who bet as well, but young men are the most likely to do this. And I think a lot of us who are men remember when we were 20 or 21, and if you allowed us to risk our entire life savings on something, that we may have been a greater risk of doing that than 20, 30 years later.
Yeah, I will say around that age, maybe a little bit later, on my first trip to Las Vegas ever, I remember being at the quarter slot machines, down like $75 after many hours, and I won a little jackpot, like $400. And then I took it over to the $1 slots. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll just play here now. I won another little jackpot. And then I did the same to the $5 slots. I ended up with $1,400 in like an hour, which was a lot for me at that time. And I was like, oh my God, I might win 20,000. What if I win so much money? And the next time I went back to Las Vegas, I thought I knew how to do it, and I lost like $700. And it was so bad, so much worse for me to do that than to win that money, that I made a rule that I will never go below $300 in a casino ever again. So, but yes, it probably like young man, risk challenge, whatever. Who are the players right now, Nathan? Are they the usual suspects on either side of the debate?
Well, the sports books are dominated really by DraftKings and FanDuel. Those are the two big sports books that have the highest market share. Now, BetMGM and Caesars are in there, Fanatics is in there, and a couple other smaller ones. But those are the big sports books, and they have dominated this space for the last several years. But now the new entrants, as you mentioned earlier in the show, are these prediction market companies, Kalshi and Polymarket in particular, and a few others that have emerged on the scene and are providing sort of a different way to allow people to risk money. They're calling these things event contracts, which they argue should not be regulated by the states. They should be regulated by the federal government. Big fight that's going on about that. But the point is that the prediction markets are allowing people to put money on sports in a different way. And critics would say it's really not that much different than what sportsbooks are doing.
Well, and Charles, what about that? They say they're not gambling, but are they gambling?
Well, look, I'll give you their argument, which is that prediction markets are selling event contracts, and event contracts are a kind of future contract that is, in their interpretation, subject to regulation by the CFTC. They have a CFTC license, and that means, in their legal argument, and It seems they've won a couple of these. It seems likely they lost one today. Their legal argument is because that's true, we're federally regulated, the states can't tell us what to do. The Trump administration, I'll say parenthetically, has very much taken the prediction market side, has even sued states to say we have exclusive jurisdiction. The counter argument is twofold. One is that, well, it walks like gambling and it talks like gambling, and it's illegal in, for example, Utah to bet on the outcome of a game. So why can Culture Polymarket come into Utah and say, no, but we want to sell people an event contract that's betting on the outcome of a game? That sure looks like gambling. And then the second argument is even if the states don't get a say, which is an open legal question, the authorizing statute for the CFTC says, among other things, since Dodd-Frank has said that there are certain kinds of event contracts that aren't in the public interest. And one of those are event contracts that are on gaming. And the question is, what's a gaming event contract? The opinion of the CFTC is that sports gambling is not gaming. My opinion is that it sure as heck sounds a lot like gaming. I give that both to inform the audience because I think there is a live legal dispute. But the loophole here is really important. There are states that want to keep sports gambling off phones. There are states, California and Texas, that don't want sports gambling in state at all currently. And part of the challenge with federally regulated prediction markets is that they want to end run this whole process.
Yeah. Our number, again, is 844-4-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. And Tolliver, as we've heard here, the prediction market companies claim that they're not gambling operations, but rather event-based derivatives.
EBDs, if you will. Let's take a listen here to Kalshi CEO Tarek Mansour, who says apps like his are doing the Lord's work and have democratized trading.
What people really care about and have opinions about and what they're really worried about, they're not things like what is the price of this stock option or what is this, how do we price the swap? It was like, will Brexit happen? Will Donald Trump win the election? Will it rain tomorrow? And, who's going to win the Oscars? Those are the things that people can relate to, and we want to build a financial market that is for everyone, not for a select elite few.
I feel like betting on whether it's going to rain tomorrow would be a pretty easy one because we have these things called meteorologists.
Yeah. Oh, I was just thinking in California, but yeah, I guess you're right. Meteorologists. Right.
We'll be right back with more on The Middle. This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking if America has a gambling problem following the meteoric rise of online betting platforms. Tolliver, again, how can people reach us?
You can call us at 844-4-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com or on YouTube.
And I am joined this hour by Axios business reporter Nathan Bomey and Manhattan Institute senior fellow Charles Fain Lehman. And I just don't want to miss this caller from Las Vegas, of course. Hey. Scott is calling in. Scott, what do you think about America and its gambling
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking the call. I kind of have a unique perspective on gaming, and how it affects society because when I was a college student, I was going to college up in Reno at UNR, and I worked as a blackjack and craps dealer at Harrah's while I was an undergrad and working on my master's. And then I worked as a teacher, a middle school teacher, and even when my career first started, I would still work at a casino dealing, pitching cards on Thanksgiving and New Year's Eve and stuff like that. So the thing about it is that in my mind, America has a serious gambling problem, and it's already taken root in the youth of this country, and there's not much we can do about it because whether it's DraftKings or the Caribbean online casinos, it's already infected our youth because many of the children, and I teach middle school for over 30 years now, they see it no differently than as if they were playing a video game. So I have seen many, many instances where kids have stolen their parents' credit card so that they could sign up to play in an online casino, and there's really no way to regulate. The casinos do what they do online to say we're taking steps to prevent minors from getting involved.
But you're saying
really no way
younger
to get
people do it. That's a very interesting point, Scott. Thank you for that call. And Nathan, it does come back to the issue I brought up earlier about with marijuana legalization. There's a lot of stuff that looks like it's being marketed to kids. What do we know about younger people getting involved in gaming, gambling, and maybe starting a habit that may be hard to kick?
I do think it's a real crisis. There is data out there to show that young boys in particular are shockingly likely to have placed a bet of some sort. Now, may it be a bet with their friends, or it may not necessarily be a bet on the phone, but it may be. And now the caller mentioned online casinos. Now that's an interesting example here because online casinos are only legal in a handful of states at this point. Michigan, for example, and Pennsylvania, and a few others. But for the most part, online casinos are not technically legal in most of the country. But that doesn't mean that people aren't doing it, because there are offshore companies that are allowing people in America to engage in online casino gambling, and so that's a whole nother aspect of this on top of the sports gambling, which, as Charles mentioned earlier, is legal in most of the country at this point.
Well, and Charles, you mentioned earlier that it's about 5, maybe 10% of people that are going to end up with a compulsive gambling problem that are going to really have an issue. Why wasn't that more of a roadblock to this major loosening of regulations over the years?
I think that particularly in the case of sports betting, that happened really quite rapidly. I have two answers. One is that sports betting in particular happened quite rapidly. The industry was raring and ready to go, right? Like we were referring earlier to FanDuel and DraftKings. These companies pre-existed legalization. They were fantasy sports, and they knew which way the wind was blowing, and they were prepared to go out and lobby and advocate for, at the state legislature level, for what they wanted. The public health community, the gambling skeptical community, was not so well organized, and in some senses, folks like me are playing catch up. That's answer one. Answer two is this canard about revenue, right? States have to balance their budgets. They're always thirsty for more revenue. Gambling of any variety is a way to put some dollars in the bank. And so, whether it's sports gambling, whether it's iGaming, whether it's lottery, whether it's Keno, whatever it may be, a lot of that, the impetus there is we need to plug some budget hole and create an organized political constituency to keep it active. I think those arguments are wrong. I think it ends up costing the state more in what it has to shell out for harms. But that is a really powerful motivator for people in politics is that budget constraint.
People are more willing to be taxed for their vices than taxed for other things, perhaps. All right, let's go to another call. Dory is calling from DeKalb, Illinois. Hi, Dory. What about you? What do you think about America and gambling?
I think it's a very addictive behavior, and I used to work in the oldest casino in Reno in 1973.
Wow.
Supporting my daughter. It was the Overland. It was real glitzy and beautiful, chandeliers, red velvet carpets, beautiful portraits on the wall. I ran Keno tickets. People drank expensive drinks and dressed up. One day I was called upstairs to run a Keno ticket. I didn't know there was an upstairs. It was a long room with rows and rows of seats and people sitting at slot machines, green institutional walls, and hazes of cigarette smoke. And I realized just what an addictive behavior it was.
And what do you think about now? I mean, when you look at how it's just exploded with growth and all these new ways to bet now?
I believe it's, basically the same thing. It's an addictive behavior no matter how you cut it. It's the same dinner. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dory. Yes, it's amazing that we've got so many people listening to the show who've worked in casinos in the past. Nathan, there was a Pew survey that I saw that found America stands out as a country with a low percentage of people who view gambling as morally wrong, only 29% compared to 89% in Indonesia and 83% in India. What do you make of that?
Well, I do think that speaks to this cultural change that's sweeping through the country, in the sense that if you see your friends doing it, if your friends feel like they're just like you, then what's so wrong about it? And it does feel like a harmless activity to some extent. I think one point I wanted to make, though, was that the government has long tolerated and regulated addictive behaviors. That is actually not necessarily unusual. I mean, cigarettes have been legal for many decades, of course, since they were invented, and certainly there are much greater restrictions on them today, and the country has gone through a massive reckoning on cigarettes and limitations on marketing, for example, which I think could be where sports gambling is headed, and the limitations on marketing perhaps. But the government does allow it in some capacity, and to Charles's point, we choose to tax it, and I think that it's very tempting for the politicians to tax it because no one's really going to complain about that. In fact, we just saw Rahm Emanuel, potential candidate as a Democrat for governor, is proposing to fund this American Innovation Fund with gambling taxes, which would be extremely unusual because the federal government does not tax gambling in the same way that states do. So this is still unfolding.
Interesting. Let's go to Rowan, who's calling in from Chicago. Rowan, what about you? What do you think about America's gambling addiction, if you want to call it that?
Yeah, well, I mean, with the this prediction market stuff, personally, I'm less. I don't really care so much about the sports gambling, but I think it's kind of disturbing that there are things that you can gamble on, like is a war going to start by a specific date, and I am worried that it doesn't seem like there's any guardrails to prevent for example, people in an administration from placing a bet on, that a war does start and pushing for that policy, right? And this could be that's just one example, but there's all of this stuff. You can bet on anything, and some of this stuff is to me kind of frankly disturbing that you can bet on it. And kind of there's no safeguards against insider trading, basically.
I'm assuming that you have never placed a bet on a prediction market.
No, I haven't.
No, I haven't either. I'm just checking. But Rowan, thank you very much for that. Charles, what about that? We could do an entire show just about the idea of people who have insider knowledge making a bet about something that's about to happen, like an invasion or, taking the head of Venezuela and capturing him and bringing him to the United States. But what about that aspect of this that Rowan brought up there?
I think it is alarming to us. I think, and there are cases where it's hard to imagine, U.S. policy being directed by somebody making a few $100,000s on a prediction market. That's obviously a lot of money, but there are other ways for people in positions of political power in the United States to make way more money than that. It's just one of many ways to capitalize being in one of those roles, which is not to say it's not alarming to us, but I tend to think that that's a highly salient issue. The reality is a market like Kalshi, 85 to 90% of what they're doing of their daily market churn is in sports gambling. That's part of why I think it's worth focusing on is, and this is the inevitable direction of the industry. We talked about iGaming earlier. Already on some of these platforms, you can bet on what's the price of certain Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies going to be in 5 minutes. That's just gambling. There are crypto coin casinos. Stake is one of the better known ones that are dubiously
I mean, the entire
legal.
crypto industry could be considered gambling.
Certainly parts of it. Certainly, sort of the worst quality parts of it. But I mean, I think the addictive stuff matters because that's where the money is, right? That is the trajectory of the industry is going to be following the profit motive, and the profit is mostly in getting people hooked on your products.
Yeah. Well, and Nathan, just on that point about getting people hooked, as you've been reporting on this, don't people have to win to get hooked? I mean, are people really winning a lot of money all the time, or isn't the house usually winning?
Well, this is a really good question, and let's dig into it, because on one side you have the sports books, which they win when you lose, and it's very difficult to beat the house over time. There are professional bettors who do win, but there's not many, and for a good reason. Now, on the other side, you have the prediction markets, and one of their biggest arguments for why they should be treated differently than the sports books is because they say they're facilitating peer-to-peer trading,
there is no
peer-to-peer
house.
betting. Yeah, so basically they don't win if you lose. But that's not 100% accurate, because what happens here is that they actually do make a fee from every trade. And so regardless of whether you win or lose, they win. And I think that's really important to note. But it is worthy of noting that they're calling this peer-to-peer trading. They say it is different than from what the sports books do. Therefore, they say, we're not going to be as much of a predatory actor as the sports books, which really benefit greatly if you lose a lot of money.
All right, our number is 844-4-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Tolliver, what is coming in at listentothemiddle.com?
Tom from WNIJ says, it already has affected major sports. I recall it took college basketball a quarter century to recover from points shaving. I don't know what that is. Johannes in Florida says, the U.S. scam economy deepens, so why not add to it by expanding the poverty industry? Legalize gambling to get more money from poor and working class people that they couldn't get in the stock and crypto markets. Meanwhile, China is building the future. Just pathetic.
All right.
Strong words.
Again, you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com. Let's get back to the phones. And Ron, who's calling in from Cincinnati, Ohio. Ron, what do you think?
I think, well, I'm not a fan of the casino version of it, but the sports betting, I think that's awesome, because it's a benefit for the common man if you look at it from a different perspective. I mean, let's face it, these days college players are getting paid. The NFL players that are getting paid today are getting tons more than they used to get. All the sports people are getting paid, and if you go to the average sports event, concession stand costs have gone up. The average families had to pay a lot more. And so when their team wins, this is a great way for them to actually benefit instead of just sitting in the stands going, yay, at least, it benefits their pockets.
So are you use these sports betting platforms?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a lot? Like every day are you on there?
The key thing is you have to have discipline. You have to treat it like a job, and it'll actually start to pay you like a job. But you have to have discipline. I know there's the addictive thing, but, it's America. You can get addicted to anything and everything in America if you put your mind into it. But if you have some discipline, you'd be surprised at what can happen. Sometimes this helps people come up with down money for a payment on a house.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. Although
And
sometimes
yeah,
they could
there's the
lose
other side
it
of
too.
it.
Right. Yeah, that would be the other.
Yeah, but it's yin and yang. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
like at one point in America we restricted people from alcohol.
Right.
Now we don't. I mean, it's amazing that happened when you look at our history. But yeah, at one point we restricted that.
Yeah.
Now we still have it, and yeah, there's still going to be alcoholics, but not everybody, and the majority that uses it is an alcoholic.
Right. Ron, thank you so much for that call. Very good points. Charles, what do you think? I mean, it is a good point that this is America. This is how we do things.
I mean, I think that's kind of true, and that gets to the point you made earlier about moralizing. We as Americans don't like making moral judgments. We don't like saying that it's bad to do stuff. And then my counter argument is almost nobody's actually consistent on this, right? Nobody. I think it's fine that heroin's illegal. I think it's fine that methamphetamine's illegal. I think it's fine that cocaine's illegal. I also think it's fine that pot's illegal, federally legal, and still in a majority of states, because those are all addictive, harmful products that really do ruin lives and have high potential to ruin lives. I think, there is a legal and, in some senses, normative consensus on this. People talk about alcohol. We've decided that we want to live with alcohol. That's our right as a democratic society. Alcohol kills 180,000 people a year. That's almost double the number of deaths associated with illegal drugs of all kinds.
Yeah.
So I don't look at that and go, things are going great with alcohol. We should follow that model with everything else. That does not seem like a counsel of success to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah. Nathan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I can't necessarily express a political opinion on it, but I would say that I think the right to do something dumb with your money has certainly been something that feels like it's sort of entrenched in society. But the right to lose all of your money, does the government have a responsibility to step in there and to stop it? Well, I think you could make a very strong argument that regulators have a responsibility to at least prevent these companies from engaging in marketing behaviors, for example, and user interface design that might cause you to want to continue to do this until it does become a problem.
Well, we're going to talk in a moment about what exactly the government may do. There are a number of proposals out there with all of this rapid change happening in the marketplace to put some regulations on gaming. Again, our number is 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com. And Tolliver, as we've said, there was a federal ban on sports betting passed in 1992. It was struck down by the Supreme Court in 2018. And the person who initially fought against it was former New Jersey Governor, Republican Chris Christie.
That do shock me. Now even he is saying that something needs to be done about prediction markets. Here he is on CNBC.
It was a 6-year fight that I led and New Jersey led to get sports gambling available to be legalized and regulated by states. And a long and expensive fight that we won against the leagues. And now we have someone coming in these prediction markets who is blatantly breaking the law in states across this entire country. 40 states have legalized sports gambling, and with that legalization, taking the responsibility to regulate it.
So far, the Trump administration has fought against state rights to regulate prediction markets, saying the federal government is the exclusive regulator of them.
Why? We'll never know. It's a mystery. They pick and choose, right?
Your calls coming up on The Middle. This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. This hour, we're asking if America has a gambling problem. I'm joined by Manhattan Institute senior fellow Charles Fain Lehman and Axios business reporter Nathan Bomey. Our number is 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. And before we get back to the phones, let's just talk quickly about solutions. There's a bipartisan group of senators that wants to crack down on prediction markets in particular, which are regulated by the CFTC. Nathan, is there any consensus on regulation?
I don't think there's a consensus, and there are, like you said, there is some bipartisan support there to take action here. Some people who say Congress never intended for the Exchange Act to be used in this way, but there are states also that are fighting this. We got state governments that say our gaming commissions are responsible for regulating sports betting, and the federal government should really butt out. But I think the real X factor here is that the President Trump's self-appointed chair of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, Mike Seelig, who happens to be the only member of the CFTC right now because there are no other sitting members, is essentially controlling the regulatory landscape here. And he has expressed pretty firm support for prediction markets. So they are going to continue to wage a legal fight for this. And a lot of people do believe this will end up at the Supreme Court.
Those of us watching on video or on YouTube could see that Charles was nodding his head as you said that, Nathan. Charles, your thoughts about that there's only one member on the CFTC. And also, what do you think reasonable regulation would look like?
Yeah, well, and I think prediction markets have an extremely favorable regulatory environment right now with Seelig at the CFTC, and they're going for it as hard as they can. And I do think we're basically guaranteed to see a circuit split and therefore move into the Supreme Court. That can and probably will change at some point. I think there's a really big regulatory question about just who's competent to handle this. The state gambling regulation commissions, often not great. The CFTC, they just did testimony in front of the Agriculture Commission in Congress, right? Like they're supposed to be doing agricultural commodities, and this has become their job. It's very strange. Look, to me, at a regulatory level, the specifics actually don't matter that much. What matters is reintroducing friction into the process of gambling, whether that means deposit limits, whether that means getting gambling off of phones, which in my mind would be a huge victory if you had to drive to the casino to do it. Whether that means
but could that ever happen at this point? Do you think that is a realistic possibility?
Gambling is not available on a phone on phones in many of the states where it's legal. There's an active bill. There's a bill in consideration in Ohio right now to say we're going to remove gambling from phones. Do I think it's going to pass? I don't know. I think it could. And I think this gets to an important reality is, whenever I talk about this issue, people say to me, you can't put the genie back in the tube, you can't put the toothpaste back in the bottle. And my response is, sports gambling was illegal nationwide in 2017. Like, that was just the status quo. It was illegal everywhere but Nevada. But for NCAA v. Murphy, it would have remained the case. And so I think it is entirely possible for Congress or the state legislatures for a different CFTC to take some degree of action to rein this stuff in.
All right, let's get back to the phones. Anne is calling in from St. Louis. Anne, what do you think about this?
Well, I do think there's a problem. It's from personal experience. I was married to a compulsive gambler many, many years ago. And what I saw and what I see now with especially young men is there's a tremendous adrenaline rush. So physiologically, there's a big response, whether they're winning or losing. And so I think that may be where the addictive part comes from, because I would notice with my husband, he'd be just on cloud nine. And this was before I knew he even had a gambling issue. But, he has very, very good behavior, very high, very joyful, the whole thing. But then those lows were really low. And so you see these younger kids doing this, and they don't have any, gatekeeping. And so what happens when they continue to want that adrenaline, rush? So it's not like a drug you have to buy and put in your body, or alcohol to put in your body. It's something your body's creating for you, that high adrenaline rush. I think that might be potentially in the future, it's going to be a huge demise for these kids. I call them kids because to me everybody's young, but yeah.
Well, what do you tell people, just based on your own experience, that you were married to a compulsive gambler? What do you tell people now about that? Do you give advice?
Yeah, once a gambler, always a gambler. I left the marriage after 4 years, but if somebody had said to me, look, they will never get over it. They can be dry and clean for years. And that happened to my ex-husband. He went to PA at the time. There was only one meeting a night in the entire area. Recovered, was good, big company, nationwide company, and completely lost it. Lost the house at Aspen, lost everything 20 years later.
Wow.
It never stopped. It never stopped. So they can kind of hide it for a long time too. And maybe it looks like they're not doing it or it's in control, but it's not. It's extremely addictive. And again, I think it's because it's biologically something they're creating on their own.
Right.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for that call, Nathan. You hear that personal experience and the warning to others about the potential harms of gambling.
Yeah, it is sad, and I think what it illustrates is that to some extent there is a public health crisis here that I think we haven't really, got our arms around yet. This idea that maybe we should be investing federal funds in dealing with this, which the federal government really doesn't do that right now. That's more done on a state level. I would say that I do think that people can actually overcome this and stop gambling. I think that's that's the case. Just like you can stop drinking, you can stop smoking. But that doesn't necessarily change the fact that many people can fall into a trap.
Yeah. Let's go to Kelly in Plymouth, Michigan. Kelly, what do you think about this, America's gambling habit?
Hi. I think it's just a horrible addiction, and it seems like you have to just almost let the person you love hit rock bottom, sadly.
Do you have experience with that?
Yes, I do. I have an adult child that is in denial, but just addicted to online gambling.
And is it the new kind of like sports betting online on his phone, or is it the prediction markets? What the betting is?
I believe he's doing the sports betting mostly. Mostly he and his college friends. They have fun with it. It's everywhere.
What would you like to see done about it, Kelly?
Probably like what they did with smoking. There needs to be some serious commitment to help just ban it legally. But I think that's going to be a long ways off, because anytime there's any way to make any money, that's the name of the game, so to speak. With anything, it's always about money.
Yeah,
Kelly, it's going to be a hard thing to get away.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for the call. And, it's interesting, Charles, this is not a perfect sampling of every single person in the country, but the fact is we've heard from a lot of people who have had personal experiences, who are very worried about the negative consequences of this. We heard from that guy who, loves doing it, but it seems like there's a lot of people that are not so happy about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's actually just polling from Siena that said among people who gamble, about a third have report that somebody's expressed concern about their gambling to them. I gambling addiction is a horrible thing, just like any addiction. It can have, that sort of, we have good evidence on increasing, in certain circumstances, its tendency to exacerbate risk of domestic violence, its tendency to exacerbate risk of acts of crime, violent or otherwise. That's a real and alarming harm. I think part of the challenge with gambling is that it's something that the user does to himself, and therefore we are reticent about regulating it. But part of getting over that, much like with smoking, where part of how we got over our concern about regulating smoking was talking about secondhand smoke. Similarly with gambling, at some point we have to say there are knock-on effects, that there are effects on the people around you.
Right.
Gambling addiction is the addiction with the highest incidence of suicide of any addiction overall.
Wow.
Suicide, of course, harms the people who engage it, but also it hurts the people around them. There are real and lasting consequences. And, in my mind, are those consequences worth having some fun betting on your phone? Not personally to me.
Yeah. Richard is calling in from Kansas City, Kansas. Hi, Richard. Go ahead with your thoughts.
Hey, what's going on? The Kansas legalized sports betting, I believe, in 2022, fall of 2022. And I had a group of buddies, love watching, football, baseball, basketball, all that stuff. And we had a blast with it. It was a lot of fun. And I think our group of 4 buddies is a great example of, a lot of people can control it. Myself, I got sucked in pretty good. And it was something that I kind of hid from my buddies even, how much I was actually betting, how often, just because I was embarrassed about it. But it was fun. I thought all right, this next parlay, I'm going to hit it and then I can win my money back. And, it didn't get too deep. But I also did notice that, it was really starting to take away from, the love of the game, watching the games, the outcomes of the games, and
Interesting.
just the time spent too with our buddies. So,
and would you say that overall you're up or down?
Oh, down. Yeah, way down.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would probably say, probably close to $7,500 down over that year, over the years.
Wow.
Maybe close to 10. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Richard, thank you very much for that call. And Nathan, there we go. Somebody who's enjoying it, having a good time, has lost money on it, and realized that it maybe got out of hand.
Yeah, and I think the strongest argument that the sports books have always had is that they say it's akin to maybe going to a Broadway show, in the sense that, let's say you spend $200 on a Broadway ticket and dinner that night, parking perhaps if you try to park in Manhattan, and that wouldn't be that much different than losing $200 on the Yankee game that day if you bet on it. And I think there is an argument to be made there that there's a degree to which this is just entertainment. But again, I think the difference, of course, is the addictive quality to this, as we've been talking about this hour. And I do wonder if we'd benefit from more education on this issue, perhaps at a young age. You look at cigarette smoking rates, for example, over time, they're at an all-time low now, and kids are smoking at lower rates than ever, probably because education on this issue has been so well done. But I think because sports gambling is such a new thing for most Americans, most people don't really know much about it, and I think are very susceptible to it.
Let's get to another caller. Lauren is in Blacksburg, Virginia. Lauren, what about you? What do you think about America's gambling habit or addiction?
I think that overall there is a gambling issue in America, and it stems from 2 major forms of escapism. Through sports betting, it's been highly gamified, and people start doing it for fun, and you never really know if you're going to get addicted. And then these prediction markets, it's more of a nihilistic escapism, where it feels like since the pandemic started, there's been a sort of loss after loss of freedom from the having to stay in your home from the pandemic, and then loss of DEI programs and scholarships and funding to go to school. And currently I'm going to university in Blacksburg, Virginia Tech, and I hear a lot of my peers talking about the sports betting just as if it's some sort of in the same conversations as talking about video games. And then I hear about these bets on like who's winning elections and what legislation will get passed, sort of betting against what they want, where it's if I'm going to lose the NSF research position I was guaranteed, then I'm going to get money out of it.
So you like bet against yourself in the prediction market. Yeah, right. But a very interesting point, Lauren, about sort of the escapism here and the connection to COVID-19. I hadn't thought about that. But Charles, the fact that it's being done on the phones, and we know that there are so many other things that we get addicted to on our phones, social media and just the phones themselves. How much of that is connected to the explosion of it, just the dopamine kick from the phone?
I think absolutely, and that's a critical part of it. Earlier, when Doreen called, I thought about the classic book about machine gambling in Las Vegas. It's called Addiction by Design by Natasha Dalshul, and she spent over a decade talking to people who are addicted, talking to people in the industry. It's like a comprehensive book on the topic. It's fascinating. And the thing she discovers is, if you've ever seen somebody who's really addicted to slot machines, they just sit there and go over and over and over and over, and it's horrifying to watch. They just give their money away. And what she discovers is the reason that they do this is to enter what she calls the machine zone, this sort of dissociative state where you're just sort of completely self-annihilating. You're totally absorbed into the machine. There's nothing but you and pulling the lever over and over and over again. And the book was extremely successful when it came out, because it came out in about 2012, which is just as social media and the phones were really taking off. People were like, oh, that's happened to me. I know exactly what that's like. It's totally available. And I think that used to be an experience that you needed to go to Las Vegas for, that sort of total self-annihilation through a machine. And the machines are designed to do this, right? Yeah. The industry knows this. That's what they're selling. And now it is available to everyone everywhere all the time. There's something in our brains that does that, and we can turn it on much more easily than we used to.
Yeah. Nathan, I'm going to go to you for the last word here, because there is a larger picture question I want to ask as well, which is some of this just about how difficult it is now in America to make money the old-fashioned way, enough to make a living, and that people are looking for a way to get rich quick?
I was wondering if that was going to come up, because I do believe that the fact that a lot of people just feel like they can't get ahead and they have to do something desperate to make money could be a part of this. I certainly think that people have an elevated risk profile. Crypto is probably a part of that. Sports betting, I think it's a part of that. And get rich quick schemes have always been a part of America. That's why the lottery is always been a thing. The government runs the lottery though, so the government is part of this, and they profit off of addiction. I think that's something a message to leave your listeners with.
Well, and a reminder, if anybody's on the lines, can't get through or wasn't able to get through this hour, if you leave us a message, we will get to that and more in our weekly podcast extra, the follow-up, so we can continue to talk about this. But for now, I want to thank my guest, Manhattan Institute Senior Fellow Charles Fain Lehman and Axios business reporter Nathan Bomey. Thanks so much to both of you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
And a reminder, we are taking the show to Kenosha, Wisconsin on May 12th. For tickets to be in the audience and participate, you can just go to listentothemiddle.com.
And we'll have more of your calls on gambling and online betting on our podcast feed. Just subscribe to The Middle wherever you get your podcasts.
And of course, you can find us online. We are on Substack at listentothemiddle.substack.com, or all of our social medias are linked to at listentothemiddle.com. The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, home of the Final Four making Illini, but not quite winners. It's produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Burmistaz, John Barth, Johnny Leonidas, and Marina Price. Our technical director is Steve Mork. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and I will talk to you next week.